When most people think about trains, usually only negative things come to mind. Why do they feel they have the right to make you late for work, wake you up in the middle of the night, show up late, be so crowded, dangerous? To put it simply, why do trains have to be so annoying? Well, the answer to all these questions is simple, really. Most of the time, the train didn't want to piss you off, it just couldn't help it. For example, this train didn't want to bury these lovely people in snow. This one didn't want to become a playground for drunk baseball fans. And this one didn't want to hurt this nice limousine. Wait, no, actually that last one was on purpose.
Ain't no mistake, hound dog.
The truth is, all trains, even automated ones, are operated by humans. And truthfully, all the negative aspects of trains I've outlined so far can be eliminated with enough money, of course. Anthropomorphizing trains at all, even for a laugh, masks the essence of the problem here. Anyways, why does it seem trains have to go out of their ways to try and irritate you, particularly when you've done nothing wrong?
What does he keep bagging up coming forward for? What the
Let's see if we can demystify 3 of the most common complaints people have regarding trains in America. So let's start with the number 1 complaint I think most people have about trains, and that is, why do trains have to go so slow over crossings? And even more infuriating, why would a train ever stop on a road crossing? So this is a problem that I fully understand, and yet, as an engineer, it's a problem that I've contributed to many, many times. First off, most freight trains in America are really, really long. The vast majority of trains that I run are roughly 1.5 miles long or 2.5 kilometers. In parts of the country where county roads are spaced a mile apart, like where I live, that means that a train is almost continuously blocking at least one crossing at any given point. On top of that, the top speed of freight trains is only 70 miles per hour, but that is only high priority trains, which make up a small percentage of total freight moved. Due to fuel conservation efforts by railroads, the majority of freight trains travel between 40 and 50 miles per hour. So given that, at top speed, the average freight train can't clear a crossing in under 90 seconds. In reality, however, a myriad of reasons contribute to slowing trains down further. When there is a section of track that needs to be worked on, trains have to slow down and not cause further damage or risk derailing. Think about potholes. If you hit a bad pothole at 50 miles per hour, you're going to damage your car. So when you see potholes or speed bumps, you slow down for them, and once you clear it, you speed up as fast as you can. Well, because freight trains are so big and so heavy, it not only takes a long time for them to slow down, but it also takes a long time to speed up. Let's say a loaded coal train that weighs about 19,000 tons has to slow from 50 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour because of a bad section of track. This train will begin braking at least 2 miles before the slow order, then the entire 1.5 mile long train has to cross the slow order, and then it can take up to 5 miles for that train to get back up to speed. That means that the train's top speed is reduced for up to 8.5 miles just because of a bad section of track that could be as short as a few feet long. So now that 90-second wait time at a crossing just went up to 2.5 minutes.
I guess I better turn around.
And spoiler alert, crossings are a great place for track staff slow orders because of the need to keep the road open, limiting the time available to work on the track. Other things that make trains slow down are traffic jams, hills, increased fuel conservation to save the railroad money, equipment breakdowns, and generally most of the same things that slow car traffic down. As for why a train would ever stop on a crossing, the same thing goes. Most rail lines in this country have only one track. That means trains going in opposite directions have to stop at sidings or sections of double track to wait for their meets. This usually occurs outside of towns where road traffic is less busy, but due to their size, trains are almost always blocking at least one crossing. Now technically trains aren't supposed to be blocking public crossings for more than 10 minutes, but due to the railroad's antithetical attitude towards the public, this rule is rarely enforced. A train may also have to block a crossing to pick up or set out cars, or it may have to be stopped for the crew to inspect their train for any number of reasons. It may be a little comfort to you, but with the advent of positive train control, the engineer always knows they're blocking a crossing, and most likely there's nothing they can do about it. So if you find yourself stuck at a railroad crossing where the train is stopped, don't freak out. Every railroad crossing has a sign with a telephone number on it. If the crossing has been blocked for more than 10 minutes, or if there's an emergency, find that number, call it, and give them the crossing ID number. That is the quickest way to get somebody at the railroad to tell that train to move. Now sticking with the subject of pesky grade crossings, why do trains even blow their horns? Well, there's one unifying principle that describes how the entire American rail network was built. Cheap. Think about it. The majority of trackage in this country was laid out when there were few to no roads outside of cities. It wasn't until the 1920s that the U.S. made a concerted effort to build inner-city highways, and it wasn't until the 1950s that they got serious about it. That's why so many highways in this country follow rail lines, because the tracks were there first, and towns and businesses were built around those tracks. Given the size of America, it would have been, and still is, extremely expensive to remove all at-grade railroad crossings. Not that it's not a worthwhile goal. Because almost all railroads are private companies, they're usually only interested in doing the bare minimum when it comes to grade crossings. And in America, the bare minimum is either a sign, or for busier intersections, a set of crossing lights or gates. Unlike other countries, none of these three methods physically prevent cars or pedestrians from crossing the tracks in front of an oncoming train, so trains began to blow their whistles as a further warning. Now, of course, this method of warning was more effective in the days of horses and carts, but regardless of the way modern motoring enthusiasts conduct themselves behind the wheel, trains are still legally obligated to blow their horns when approaching public grade crossings. Trains have to blow their horns regardless of whether there is traffic at the crossing or not, regardless of whether or not another train is already blocking the crossing, and regardless of whether or not there's a quiet zone in place if there is anything temporarily wrong with the crossing. What is a quiet zone, you might ask? Well, a quiet zone is a magical railroad crossing that is actually safer than a traditional whistled crossing.
Alexa says she worries quiet zones will create more accidents between trains and people.
At quiet zone crossings, cars are unable to drive around the crossing gates, and therefore trains don't have to blow their horns, they just ring their bell through the crossing. The only problem is that establishing a quiet zone requires the city or county where the crossing exists to take on financial liability of a grade crossing accident instead of the railroad. This means that many cities in this country are unable or unwilling to take on the burden of establishing quiet zones, leaving their residents to slumber to the relaxing sounds of obnoxious train horns for all of eternity. Or at least until they come up with the money to build grade separations. Okay, let's change it up and talk about passenger trains for a minute. If you've ever ridden a train in America, there's a pretty good chance that it was late. Whether it was a subway, a commuter train, or Amtrak, on-time performance is one of the biggest problems with passenger trains in this country, and one of the biggest reasons why taking the train is not a reliable alternative for most Americans.
Just left us on the siding until they got somebody from Port Huron. Yeah, which was 200 miles away.
The number one reason why Amtrak and commuter trains are late in this country is that most passenger rail systems do not own their own track. This puts them at the mercy of the host railroads which do. Now, particularly in big cities, freight railroads that host commuter trains do try to get the trains over the road and out of their hair. This usually means that in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, etc., the majority of freight trains run at night, and everything is put on hold during morning and evening rush hour. This doesn't mean, however, that problems don't arise. Mechanical malfunctions, trespassers, grade crossing issues, bad weather, maintenance, and human error are all problems that can happen to any rail system, but are especially likely to happen on railroads where speed is not a priority, and speed is not a priority to American freight railroads.
It was just before 10 o'clock last night when that boulder hit.
It also doesn't help that freight trains do not operate on a schedule. Well, okay, technically, some freight trains operate on a customer schedule, but that schedule isn't printed, enforced, or adhered to. In the old days, when railroads actually cared about their passenger trains, all trains, both passenger and freight, operated to a timetable. Of course, there were occasional delays, but when a train crew's life literally depended on adhering to a schedule, you can better be sure that they did their best to stick to it. Trust me, as a railroad employee, I know how frustrating it is to wait for trains. I spend the vast majority of my working life waiting for trains due to conditions that are outside of my control. But the fact of the matter remains that as long as passenger trains operate on tracks owned by a freight railroad, on-time performance will always take a back seat to the track owner's bottom line. Now, to be fair, passenger railroads do contribute significantly to their own trains being delayed. In fact, in 2018, 28% of Amtrak's total hours of delay were caused by Amtrak. One of the biggest contributors to these delays is the age of their rolling stock. All of the diesel locomotives that Amtrak owns were built in the 1990s. They're old, tired, and have been rebuilt numerous times and have traveled millions of miles. Their coaches aren't any better, with the majority of them having been built in the 1970s and 80s. This age leads to mechanical breakdowns, which cause delays. Now, as to why Amtrak's rolling stock is so old, well, you'll just have to ask your congressional representative about that. So you may be wondering, there's no freight trains on the New York City subway. Why were they bragging about reaching an 80% on-time performance in 2019? And to that I would just have to say, yeah, I have no idea. Each metro system faces its own set of challenges that it must deal with on a daily basis, whether it's the Staten Island Railway or the Tren Urbano in Puerto Rico. Broadly speaking, the age of the infrastructure and underinvestment in the system are the main causes of delays in metro systems. The New York City subway is an engineering marvel that has made great improvements in safety and reliability since its first still operational line opened in 1885 as part of the above-ground BMT Lexington Avenue line. The majority of the underground portions of the New York City subway were built before World War II and have therefore needed significant rehabilitation work to continue operating. The MTA has spent hundreds of millions of dollars updating signaling systems and rolling stock across the system, but it's a very long process and several lines have yet to be upgraded. Other metro systems in this country are no different. Age of infrastructure and rolling stock are the leading causes of delays and are coincidentally the most expensive aspects of the system to fix. Even light rail systems, which are a relatively recent addition to America's transportation network, are showing their age in some cases. The bottom line is, train delays are usually caused by the bottom line.
Gasp! I never would have guessed.
Freight railroads will continue to lengthen their trains and slow them down to drive down operating costs to the detriment of the general public. Transportation systems are really, really expensive, regardless of whether or not they move cars, airplanes, trains, or people. If you want the delays to end, you're going to have to spend. Thanks a lot for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like, and I will see you all soon.